Right, so here we are. Thank you very much, Sam, for joining us. For everyone, this is Samantha Gadd, or Sam Gadd. She runs an amazing organisation called Humankind. We were just discussing where we first met, and we don't know exactly how, but our paths definitely crossed, and we've probably known each other for 6 years. I'll get you to do a bit of an introduction about yourself, but I suppose, for me, the big thing I like about you is that as someone else who started a business, I know, just how hard it is. I really admire that you've got stuck in, you've done it, you've built something that you can be really proud of. And it is a business brand that is definitely getting right across the country. So without further ado, just tell us a wee bit about Humankind, Sam, what it does, maybe what its sweet spot is.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me on here today. And yeah, I can't remember how we met, which is kind of weird, but you've definitely been in my circle for a long time, and I've really appreciated your support over the years as well. So yeah, Humankind is my baby. It's just turned 8. And, fair to say it's been a good old roller coaster growing this business. Any professional services business owner will understand what it means to grow a business like this. But we provide outsourced HR services or managed HR services to organisations across New Zealand. We work with small, medium organisations and also central government organisations, kind of in everything in between, non-profits, private, local council, those sorts of things, and anything in the HR realm. So we have a really strong team of generalists, but we also have some real strength and depth of talent, particularly across employment relations, leadership, culture, and employee experience are our kind of key areas that we love to work in. So yeah, it's been a blast. We've worked with well over 500 organisations in the 8 years that we've been going.
Yeah, well, I think I want to get to the current market and things you're seeing, piece of advice that you might have for people. But before that, I suppose I kind of wanted to centre in on your brand's done such a good piece around Humankind employee experience. What's so important about the employee experience, and why have you focused on culture and employee experience, or that Humankind brand? How did you land there, and why is that?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. It's coming up 4 years ago that we changed our name. We originally started the business as being called HR Shop, and it's about 4 years ago that we changed our name to Humankind. And it was really around that time that I was really watching, listening, reading everything that was happening overseas with some of the big sort of unicorn companies and how they were building such successful organisations, and heard about this concept of employee experience through the Airbnb story, actually. They were the very first organisation globally to have a head of employee experience. His name was Mark Levy. And I love the concept of bringing in not only HR, but things like technology, catering, real estate, facilities, all of the things that actually have an impact on your time at work under that kind of umbrella of employee experience. And so it's been from that time that I've really recognised that the future of HR is employee experience. And it's far broader than some of the traditional HR processes that have been in our domain for so long. And really sort of taking the Humankind brand and wanting to always be at the front of the market, talking about what employee experience is and trying to essentially educate the market, because even now we still don't have many organisations that are focusing on employee experience, and so it's taking quite a lot of time to introduce what the concept is and how to go about it. And that was also the reason for launching the Employee Experience Awards a few years ago, or a couple of years ago now too. We're really passionate about the difference that employee experience can make. And I know if you look at any organisation that's really winning in their market, they're delivering the best customer experience. And of course, that's all coming from a great employee experience. So I absolutely love that commercial link. And, for years talking to CEOs and business owners or business leaders about HR and kind of, seeing the eyes sort of, slowly shutting. And then all of a sudden, when you can make the link to those commercial outcomes by linking it to customer experience, all of a sudden you've got CEOs really leaning into that conversation. And that really excites me.
Yeah. And from whether it's awards or over the last 4 years, where for any organisation starting the journey, where do they start? Where would you go? Geez, if you did nothing else, start here.
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, where would you start? You'd have to ask your people. So the best place to start is by talking to your people. And if you're in a small or medium organisation, actually often your people have never been asked what it feels like to work in your organisation, or what people love and what people don't so much love. And you'll find that by just having those conversations and really seeing where they naturally go and what have been highlights and what have been these real sort of moments that matter, and equally where they might have felt really let down, you might find some real golden nuggets of areas that will make an impact. But overall, if you ask me kind of what area has the biggest impact on employee experience, it's by far leadership. So if an organisation can do one thing, is to really focus on what does leadership mean within that organisation, and bringing a real sort of modern leadership approach to people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about growing as a leader myself. You know, I've been, and I use the word deliberately, managing for a long period of time, but I haven't been leading all that long. But it is interesting. You have to be quite brave or courageous to go get that employee feedback. And I know, you know, for myself or chatting to other people that I know who lead teams, you know, you're always thinking the worst. You're expecting the worst about yourself or the worst about your organisation. And to your point, I think when you do start to engage with staff or start to listen, you know, you'll find out that some small tweaks can get you a long way forward.
Yeah.
I smiled when you talked about go ask your staff about the employee experience, and I went, geez, it's so easy and obvious, isn't it? You know,
I know.
you don't have to answer it as the leader. You've got to be brave enough to ask the question.
Well, I think actually, and that's the insight right there, is that modern leadership is courageous, and it's acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and it's being vulnerable and sharing that with your team. And so in some ways, I find that quite a relief, because I don't need to have all the answers as a leader. I can actually just go and talk to my people, and we can co-design whatever it is together, which takes the pressure off me, but it also provides a far better outcome for my people because they're involved. So it's actually kind of a win-win, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I just smile at myself going, it's a stupid question when I ask it. Tell me about leadership, because I you know, certainly one thing I see in recruitment is we get to see a whole lot of organisations like you do, and you know, and I was going to say I can see, but that's not necessarily the right words. But I can feel when someone's got a good leadership, you know, a good leader system or a good leader. I'm an absolute believer that, and this may not be the right statement, but for me, it is that it starts at the top. You know, ideally, you'll have a good board or a good advisory group. That's always a bit mixed bag, in my opinion. But definitely, your you know, chief executive or leader or the executive team around them need to be cohesive and need to live the values. Is that what other parts of leadership, or how strong is that requirement, do you think?
It's everything, if you ask me. So I think if the person in the CEO role, and particularly that sort of senior leadership team, however big that is, if they're not aligned in where the organisation is going, why the organisation exists, so purpose, and the way that they're going to get there, so values and behaviours, then you're really going to struggle as an organisation to move forward. And you know, great leaders today, you know, I've already mentioned vulnerable. I think that's such an important trait for modern leaders, but also to lead really authentically and to really, really believe in the why of the organisation. I think people are craving more than just a pay packet. We all know that. And so what they want to do is they want to know who they're making a difference for or what they're impacting. And it's our job as leaders to make that connection for people when it's not so obvious. You know, most of us don't run, you know, a hospital or, you know, a school where if you're a teacher or a surgeon, you kind of know exactly what you can see that the person that you're helping on a daily basis. Whereas if you're in a corporate or even a really large organization, that might be, you know, a few steps apart, kind of the difference that you're making. Your role might not be, you might not have that such an obvious connection. And I think as a leader, it's our role to really connect that for people who, you know, what difference are you making and for who? And if you can do that, then you get, you know, a huge amount of buy-in.
Yeah, one of the things, and it's funny, it links to leadership and candidate experience or employee experience, but it doesn't often come up, because I think there's a mindset between line managers, leaders, that HR law is relatively negative, or it's compliance driven rather than, you know, it can be used with good intent to get you to a place. What's your view on whether it's employment law or just that entire width of employment relations? I do think people see it as two separate items, but the more work I've done with leadership or employee experience, I realise how attached they are. And I guess my words, but I think HR done with good intent is really straightforward. You do need to know that there are steps, but it's where you start to want to push the boundaries or cut a corner where trouble comes. But what's your take on employment legislation, employment relations, and why do people think that it's so hard?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, one of the primary principles is good faith in terms of our employment legislation, and that's not a bad thing. That's sort of, being really transparent and having the conversations early, and building those trusted relationships. And so I think, we work with so many organisations as well who find some of those parts of the employment law frustrating. For example, if you're having to go through a change process and the particular steps you need to take, and lots of organisations will be struggling with this at the moment, to actually make those change or cut costs if they need to. But I actually really like most of the employment law. I think it's there for a reason, and I've seen so many situations where an employer has got an idea, they want to execute, they don't want to have to go through the sort of consultation process that the employment law outlines. However, when you do sort of support them and show them the value of the consultation process and they go through it, oh my gosh, they get ideas from their employees they haven't actually thought about, which is the purpose of the consultation process, which does actually impact their final decision making, and it's better. So for me, I totally recognise, and as an employer, I know myself that, if you want to make changes or if you want to do things, like some of those processes might feel a little bit a burden, but I definitely recognise the value of them. And I think you're right. Like, it's when an employer wants to be a little bit, say, creative and skip steps, then the problems come up. But it's there for a reason, and it is there to protect employees. And but at the same time, while it's there to protect employees, most of the time it actually is also the best for the employer if they go through that process properly. Yeah,
no, I completely agree. And I think that good faith is a really good word. I kind of forgot that tone, but it's like anything with an employee relationship. If you enter in good faith and you do your employee experience in good faith, or your customer experience in good faith, then you'll land on a pretty good result. I would have thought it's so that open dialogue becomes really, really more and more critical. What are some of the tools? Are there some popular tools around getting candidate experience, employee experience, just gathering some of that information, outside of small team meetings? Are there tools and applications you've been using or see that are growing in trend?
Yeah, so you're talking about sort of surveys and like that sort of thing. Yeah, I think people use lots of different tools these days, and we're not we've got lots of relationships with lots of survey providers, and I think it's really, you've got to make sure that you choose the one that's the right fit for your organisation. But a couple that come to mind, Joyous is an amazing player in the survey space, really new, mostly focusing on really large organisations or large enterprises, but they're providing kind of a continuous conversation tool to the market. And then you've got Ask Your Team, which is an amazing sort of New Zealand owned as well organisation who are doing surveys for small, medium and large organisations, particularly successful in the public sector. Both are tools which are great. I think, you don't need a fancy tool either. So we're using Slack at the moment. I'm just doing lots of polls on Slack, depending on what we're kind of wanting to learn from our people. And you can use those sort of communication tools to also get that feedback on an ongoing basis. Every Wednesday, we have like a hump day poll to kind of see how people are feeling on a Wednesday, and just kind of with a range of different emojis, people check in and can add comments. And particularly during lockdown, it's been good to just check in with people in that way. But yeah, I think there's so many cool tools out there, and it's really about finding out what's the purpose of the tool, what are you wanting to find out, and what's the best fit for your organisation.
Am I out of date now when I still really like engagement surveys, culture surveys? I like where they can take the conversation. Is that still in vogue? It feels, I go to so many organisations where the culture survey either hasn't been executed or hasn't been done, or it's lapsed. And I find that remarkable, because I think, how does the lead team get a gauge around engagement or culture if they're not doing these? Is that your understanding, or what you're seeing, or what's your take on it?
I don't think you're out of date by saying that a culture survey is still a good thing. I think culture surveys are great. where I think the challenge comes up, and this is where organisations might be heading, is, you know, a once a year culture survey is not enough. So if that's all you do, then that's a problem. I think surveys should be frequent, and that's where both Joyce and Ask Your Team as examples are like that. And there's a lot of pulse survey tools out on the market. A once a year survey where you don't get the results for a couple of months, and then it takes you ages to then get together a focus group and figure out what you're going to do, and then, you know, you're 6 months away from the next one, and no one takes action, and then you do the next one. I mean, that is a waste of time. Yeah. So it's really about what's the information you're seeking to get, make sure it's regular, keep having those conversations. And of course, on top of the survey, like one thing that we really stand for at Humankind is that a survey alone is not enough. So making sure that you're having those conversations, because you know, the value that you can get from one-to-one conversations is huge compared to what people are willing and feel like writing in a survey. Yeah. So yeah, it's part of a suite of tools. I don't think you can rely just on a single annual survey anymore.
Yeah, and I said we use Culture Amp,
yeah, it's cool,
and it blows me away how interactive it is, how ready it is, and how it offers other surveys within it to tweak and play with. But
yeah, it's another great tool, and there's several tools which I haven't mentioned, but that is another really good one.
Yeah, I only say that going, it was interesting as a leader, because you can put down a benchmark going around engagement. It feels like a pretty good leadership tool to go, well, I want my engagement to be, admittedly it is a milestone at a point in time, but for me it was a really good metric to go, how am I performing? But then I engaged another organisation, Two Little Birds, who would help me activate the learnings from it. So go, well, this is what do we want to take away? How do we communicate that? Continuously communicate. There is a lot of work with it, but I felt like that was part of what just transformed our culture as well, is be willing to listen, willing to act, and have people see that you're acting.
I think you got the first thing you said was willing to listen. Like, I think if you've got that, then it doesn't matter what tool you use, as long as you are doing something to listen to your people and take their feedback on board and do something with it. That's awesome.
Right now, super nervous times. Certainly I'm hearing in the market that the wage subsidy will start to run out look at my watch, in the coming weeks. Certainly if you're a medium-sized business and a large-sized business, well, anyone really, you'll be some way caught. What are the trends you're seeing? What are the conversations you're having before we get to what advice do you give? You know, what are you seeing out there? What are you hearing?
I'm seeing a couple of different things. So you're right, like it's such a challenging time for so many. And I think, we held a live Q&A yesterday, and I definitely said at the beginning, like, just wanting to acknowledge that some organizations are just absolutely in that peak stress mode. So while some of us are kind of like, oh, let's plan how we're going to get back to level 2 and how do we reopen the office, and there's some positives in this and working from home, wonderful for those that have got that, but there's actually so many organizations that are just actually struggling to survive right now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. I'm seeing a couple of trends. So there's definitely organizations that are using this as they're the ones that are probably less impacted revenue wise at the moment, and using this as a real opportunity to look at their ways of working and kind of think about what does the future of work look like for us, and absolutely be smart about costs and making some tough decisions potentially, or having sort of reduced hours for a certain period of time, and those sorts of decisions are quite common. But I'm also, it's quite frightening, but I'm still seeing a lot of organizations that I think have their head in the sand a little bit. Like, I don't know about you, but I really believe that we're in for quite a tough time for quite a long period of time. I don't think that once we get out of lockdown, we're going back to normal. I don't think that level 2 is going to bring back all the spending. And so I think, organizations that aren't planning to have quite a tough year, except for select industries that are booming because of this, I think it's probably not realistic to be expecting that you can continue on the way you were before. And so that worries me a little bit. And I feel like we're going to have a real wave of organisations that hit a bit of a wall and then have to make change because they haven't planned for that early enough. So those are the two sort of camps I'm seeing at the moment, is organisations that are proactive, using this as an opportunity to really think about their ways of working and actually using it as a time to transform. And there's never been a time where you can make change faster than you can now. Some things that might have taken 6-12 months to get off the ground, whether it's something digital or whatever, people are doing it in weeks because you have to. But then organisations with their head in the sand worry me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think as an organisation, we've talked about this before, but I think as you go from a small organisation where there's 4 or 5 sitting in one room and one one product line, one revenue line. I absolutely understand the vulnerability, but the complexity of that is a bit different once you get to a slightly larger, medium-sized organisation with more people. You might have geographical spread, you might have product spread, margin difference or a key client, supply chain. It does get more difficult and more difficult. But what are some of the things I do feel like for most organisations, or let's say a vast majority, people is the cost and they go to that. But what are some of the options before, and are there some options before restructuring to reduce headcount? You've just talked about, reducing hours, etc. Can you rattle off 4, 5, 6 things that every organisation could think about, before they get to, geez, we've just got to cut head,
Yeah,
what's your
I
take?
think it's really important for organisations to look at all options before reducing headcount, but I think reducing headcount will be the only option for lots of organisations as well. So definitely looking at all of the operational costs and things that you simply were a luxury beforehand and definitely a luxury now, and just getting rid of those. And I think being quite open with your team about the choices that you're making around that stuff. We were used to spend money on this, we're simply not doing that anymore. Things like, there's so many things, like even little things for the office, but like fruit and travel and like some of those things that you used to spend a lot of money on, like how can you pare back some of those costs? Because if you're still kind of splashing money there and then cutting staff, that doesn't feel right. Certainly looking at reductions of hours across the team. Definitely if you have less work on, I would recommend reducing hours before you reduce pay, because if you've got less work, people can probably work less and therefore they're not feeling it's a different conversation, isn't it? Reducing hours versus reducing pay. But certainly I know organisations sometimes the leadership team might reduce pay and then the rest of the team will reduce hours, just because the reality is leadership teams will be working harder than they've ever worked to get through this crisis. And I think those are probably some of the things you could do before looking to reduce the number of roles you've got in your organisation.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We'd kind of, talk with some where they went, and just realising, I think everyone thinks it's either 10% or it's 80%, but it could be 70%, it could be 60%. I think there are options for people out there to consider redeployment. If you can really help, and it maybe transitions another completely different conversation, but I was chatting to someone else recently and I went, redeployment is still an option before, if you can give enough notice to an individual or group of individuals to go, hey, it is going to be really tough. If we can find redeployment, and we've seen some of that through the tourism and travel industry, where they've gone into another something, whether that's just as an interim, but for me, it makes a lot of sense, because if we have a V rebound or a U rebound or a W, whatever the letter shape, then, you may want these people back, and hopefully you do want them back, because I think it's really important that if you can, and it just fits in with this piece that, it is about exiting people in such a great way that they'll come back to you, given the opportunity and given you have the opportunity, etc. But that's another whole sideline about how you transition people.
We're definitely talking a lot about that sort of restructuring with humanity. Our purpose is to lead with humanity at Humankind, and I think even when you've got to make the toughest of tough decisions, which no leader wants to downsize their team, that's the reality. It's a horrible place to be as a leader or a business owner. But even if you've got to do that, like, how do you go about doing it, and doing it a really human way, and involving people and being really transparent and doing it with heart, like showing the fact that it's difficult is, for you as well. And really thinking about what support you can provide. And I think there's a lot of things to think about to do that in a way that really shows that you care for that person, and that hopefully if there was an opportunity in the future, they may want to come back to you because of how you've treated them so fairly, even if the outcome's grim for them.
I agree. I just think there's that humanity is a great word. I go, there's a couple of ways people can leave, but if you leave with, them having dignity, them felt they've been part of the conversation, I think you've still got a positive employee experience regardless of where they go next. Sam, next question. Where do they start? I agree. There are some, organisations out there who know they need to do this change. Will be thinking, geez, I can't afford to get an HR person involved. My argument would be you can't afford not to. Where do they start if they go, I know I need to do this, I just haven't got to it?
Yeah, okay. Definitely not procrastinating is a piece of advice I'd give, because the reality is, if you're sitting in your business knowing you need to make the change, I can almost guarantee you that your people know as well. And so the longer you leave it, the more anxiety they might have. And so being really transparent and communicative with your people and talking through some of the decisions that you're having to make. And that's why I say making sure you've cut every single other cost before you get to the decision around roles is really important. And even sharing with your team, you know, how the wage subsidies have helped, but also when the wage subsidies are going to run out, the sorts of decisions that you're thinking that you're going to have to make. I always say that, you know, when you're managing change, it's also your opportunity to engage the workforce of your future. So even if you've got, you know, 10, 20, 500 people, the people that aren't going, you know, the people that will be there at the end of that, so the people that roles aren't immediately impacted, they are still going to be impacted by your organisation going through change. So making sure that you communicate really well with those people as well is really important. But certainly starting to form up your business case essentially is what you need to do to go through a change process, and which talks to, for a start, like the current environment, all of the changes you've already made, why you're left with a decision that you think is the last resort, that, you know, now the only thing you have got left is to downsize the size of your team. The reason that you're looking at the specific roles that you're looking at. So remembering that it's not about people, it's about roles. So you've got to really think about your rationale and why those roles are the ones that you're looking to reduce. And then, of course, going through the process of involving your people and having those conversations and making sure you're letting them have an opportunity to get feedback. It is quite a prescriptive process to follow. So, you know, if you don't know what you're doing, I probably would suggest to seek a little bit of advice. It doesn't have to be really expensive to get someone on board to help you to do it, but just seeking some advice around the right steps to take, the right order, what you know, how you communicate with them, enabling them to have the right support, and all those sorts of things are really important, because not only is it the right thing to do, but it's really the right thing to do by your people.
Well, what are the risks? So I think, yeah, and I think this is the bit that worries me for managers, leaders. They're going to go, geez, I just need to execute this. And what are the risks to them by you know, getting this process wrong? And I think you mentioned one, you know, it's not only the employees you're, you know, offboarding, but the remaining culture you have. But I feel like there's a whole lot of legal risk as well.
There's definitely legal risks, yeah. If it's not seen to be a genuine process where consultation was genuinely sought, then absolutely someone could pull a personal grievance, you know, present a personal grievance to you about the way the process was handled. And because the process is so prescriptive, that's why you need to follow it step by step, because employees might, you know, very well know the process you should follow, and if they don't go through that process, then they'll be certainly getting some advice themselves on that. But I think, you know, there is the legal risks, and those are really important to acknowledge, but actually the bigger risk is actually just your the cultural risk, the reputation of the organization, and your own reputation for not going through a fair process, and certainly like the employees that are left and how they feel about the process that you ran to exit their peers. I think, you know, change is so challenging for every single person involved, and it's one of the hardest things to lead if you're a business owner or leader. It's one of the worst situations to be in, and so, you know, making sure that you've got someone there that can actually just give you a bit of advice. Like as I say, it doesn't have to be a big investment, even if it's just an hour or two of advice of kind of like how to go through it. Yeah. And I'm really happy to help if someone wants to just talk, have a yarn on the phone at no obligation. I think it's really important to make sure that you follow those steps. In fact, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff you can find online for free.
I was just going to ask you about that. I think, you know, where do they go hunting for something? My view is it's easier to talk to someone for 1 or 2 hours. I completely agree. Hey, here's the framework. You can do all the population of the templates yourself, and just getting someone to critique and review with you. That would be my advice to people. Please don't do it alone. But yeah, are there places they can go to get some independent information on it?
Yeah, I think MB has some. My only thing around the thing is, it's like, and even templates and stuff, you've just got to be careful because every single employment relationship is different. Every contract is different. So the terms and conditions and different policies that might exist, and also just the risk around a particular role in comparison with their peers, and every situation is so unique. And so it's not as simple as just finding a template and populating it. But I think to even get step by step the process that you need to follow, I'm sure you can find that on the MB website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. What advice do you need to give to both employees and leaders at this time? You know, again, you'll be chatting to a whole lot of different people. Firstly, to employees, we've talked a lot about the employer. If you're an employee, what's your advice to that, to that group at the moment, if you have any?
Yeah, it depends on what the organisation they're part of is going through, I suppose. But I think to be really transparent and to share how they're feeling through this whole process, it's really important that organisations as a whole are focusing on well-being and that kind of emotional and support and social support for their people. And so if you're an employee, talk to your peers, talk to your leader, share how you're feeling, certainly share your ideas for how you think your organisation might or could or should evolve. Just that open communication is really important.
And tips for manager, or what piece of advice if you caught someone and said, look, this is the best thing you can do? One of them obviously is to, if you're thinking about it, then to act. But beyond that, what other piece of advice have you been giving out at the moment to leaders or managers?
Yeah, focus on your people's well-being and that communication. So I think a lot of organisations, my sense that a lot of organisations have actually done very well at communicating, particularly during level 4. So organisations set up these once or twice daily, all hands kind of meetings where everyone was getting updated comms, and the pace of communications and things was really good. And what I'd say is don't drop that just because we're going to level 2. I think people are still feeling very vulnerable, and people are still really challenged and scared about COVID, but also they're really scared about the impact of the economy on the organisation that you're part of. So keep communicating, keep being really transparent. And then I think the last thing for business leaders and owners is, also have a plan. So be working on your strategy, talk to the organisation, talk to your people about how your organisation is going to be relevant into the future. Make sure that if you're pivoting, involve them in that pivot. They don't want, yes, it's really important just to sort of communicate about the current, but they've also got to be confident that you've got a plan to get them through this. And the reality is the recession that's going to hit, it is going to be tough, and lots of organisations won't survive. So if you're a leader, it's your responsibility to take that seriously and make a plan and involve the people with that.
Yeah, it's good. I think, it's interesting around the employee or, candidate employee. My big point, and certainly we've been trying to do it at Inside, is, that real focus of number one, you. It's, there is an element that the organisation is required to look after you, and it should be looking after you. And, my big advice to candidates and to our people is you've got to take some real responsibility to get yourself in a really good number one, you wellness space, understanding of your plan, maybe the organisation's plan, but it is really important to take some ownership and take some control where you can, I think, at the moment as well. Because if
actually,
yeah.
I think that's such a good point. And it was funny because in the first couple of weeks, I was, one of the many people joking, about the COVID bulge and whether we're going to fit our jeans and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually kind of took a step back and went, actually, it's pretty irresponsible to be making those jokes, because I think, as leaders, we really need to set the example and be looking after ourselves really well through this. And if we're doing what we, impacting what we can. So I think you're right, like lots of things aren't in our control right now, but nutrition, physical exercise, sleep, those things are in our control. So I've been really focused personally on those things and making sure that I'm looking after myself the best I possibly can, so that when I, emerge into level 2, I'm as, my resilience is as good as it can be. And certainly everyone's resilience has been absolutely tested during this time, with kids at home or sick, spouses or friends, and all of those things that are going on for people. So, take responsibility for yourself and do what you can to look after yourself, I think is really important for employees and employers.
Yeah, and I say that because sometimes I think there can be a tendency, and you feel the weight sometimes as a leader, which is it's a weight you're up for, but it's a weight you want to share to go, look, I want to give you tools. Or, I think to your point around the employee, I think I can say as a leader, I want to hear, I want to know what you need. Again, how do I get obstacles out of the way to make life easier for you? Certainly one of the big things has been said to me is, Troy, you've got to reset expectations. And I've got to say it more than once. I've got to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, individually, collectively, my expectation is that you look after number one, you, because it all falls down after that point. I truly believe that we talk about number one, you, number one team, number one Inside. And I think, that would be just another tip for leaders and another tip for individuals is, it does, if you want to look after your family, you've got to be in a pretty good place yourself. If you want to look after your children, you've got to be in a pretty good place yourself. And that's not meaning you have to be perfect. You just have to be doing the best you can, to your point.
I really like that, and it really resonates with me as well. And I think we were talking about, as people emerge back into the workspace, it's actually a lot of thinking for organisations to do to go back into the office. It's not as simple as opening the doors. And while organisations have a real responsibility to ensure that safety and contract tracing apps and signage and desk spaces and all that kind of stuff happens, there's actually a real shared responsibility for employees to also do their piece. And health and safety, well-being, number one, it's always that, like, there's a responsibility on both parts. And if you can be doing anything you can to look after yourself at the moment, then you should be.
Yeah, I agree. Any last comments or any kind of tips for people on COVID, or I'm going to let you get to your next meeting. No doubt you've got a Zoom or a team meeting with someone.
Back-to-back Zooms. Who's looking forward to getting away from them?
Getting away from bits of them. I have started doing some over the phone while I walk down the beach, trying to get someone talked about having some buffers in your day, and I went, actually, it's exactly what I need. I'm locked upstairs, and a bit of buffer and sunshine is good for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And actually that sort of reminds me of the final thing I'll say actually is, don't just rely on the fact that you're seeing everyone in a group meeting via Zoom. Pick up the phone and have those one-to-one conversations. And it doesn't have to be a Zoom, like a phone meeting while you're out for a walk is perfect. Yeah. Because if you're not checking in with your people one-to-one, then you don't necessarily know how they're really feeling.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for your time. I'll hopefully catch up with you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy.
Thanks, Sam. Go well.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.